The other area that that I find quite interesting is lifestyle. In other words, acreage, which and then maybe adding a granny flat to it, because with very little council requirement, you can put in a 60 square metre granny flat. That's almost tick the box, as long as it's a good one. So, now, there's another area along with that value add, which I'm finding fascinating. And it's not being done much in Australia, but it's being done a lot in Scandinavian countries, is basically pre-built homes. In other words, homes built in a warehouse, in a factory, transportable, prefabricated homes. Now, in Australia, I believe it's only about 5% of the housing market is prefabricated homes. In the past, they've been terrible little just sheds, really. But there seems to be a bit of a trend happening. That the interesting thing in Scandinavia is that they, because of weather, I think is part of the challenge, is 50% of homes built in Scandinavian countries, and especially Sweden, I think it is, are prefabricated. So there's, I believe there's maybe an upside. Then along with that, there's another trend happening, and this is my thoughts at the moment, because I'm sort of looking at value adding and doing some property investment. Now, there's you can get a prefab home, and then the other thing you can do with it that's happening too is the intersection of technology into that space as well. And you've got solar power, low energy use electrical appliances, and along with that now we have the cost of batteries going down. So off the grid. In other words, you don't need to worry about spending $50,000 to put in a power line from the into your acreage. So I'd be interested in your thoughts in sort of the prefab value add area. I don't know if you've done much research on it, and also the I suppose off the grid technology that is also intersecting at the moment.
Yeah, so I think technology in the property space is really, really interesting. There's a few different things going on. Like there's the whole build to rent space, which is really interesting. So particularly larger development companies are purpose building properties specifically designed for the rental market. So they're never designed to be a homeowner property. And as such, they're building in technology to support that. So for example, remote managed, fire alarm systems, so you don't have to have someone going around and checking, or smoke detector systems, and a whole bunch of other really interesting smart technology around that's specific to those. Smart technology in general, I think, is a really interesting addition to homes. I think it's going to be driving markets a lot more in the future. That desirability. It's quite funny because I've got no problem turning a light switch on and off, but I can see in a couple of years walking in the home and say lights on, lights off, or Google turn the lights off is going to be much more common, and we're all going to think, geez, can you imagine? Remember those old days where we had to hit the thing with our finger? So I find all of that really, really fascinating. The prefabricated stuff I love. Now, prefabricated, I've seen it just in the last few years, has become much more common, particularly for granny flats, right? So where I first started seeing it was in the granny flat, with granny flat providers, and it went from here's a box to like here's a beautiful, geez, this looks like a homestead or something, and it's just it's basically clicked together, and it gets built in like 2 days or 4 days or something. It's insane. And the thing is now they've gone from 2-bedroom granny flats up to 4-bedroom homes, and it suddenly becomes really, 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 really interesting, because the cost to build, so the cost to do the value add is significantly lower, but you get the same benefit. So I think that whole world is really interesting. We haven't done anything specifically with those kind of projects, but it's where I would think it's all going. I think it makes so much more sense. And then when you've obviously got the solar kind of stuff. Now, I don't have a huge opinion on solar, but I think we're on that kind of precipice, as you kind of mentioned, where the technology is getting so much better that one of the hardest parts about, say, doing development sites. When I say development site, let's just say a small development. Let's say you buy a house, you subdivide the backyard, and you just want to build one other dwelling in the back. You touched on a really interesting point: is if the services aren't on the right side of the road, then it can cost you $50,000, $100,000 to try and get the services connected. The problem with just focusing on the power technology part is it doesn't solve all the problems. So you've got so if we can have the solar system and do all of that kind of stuff, and that can provide all the needs of the property, and you have smart tech. So you mentioned low wattage, low voltage outlets and all of that kind of stuff. You can actually, incorporate, smart lighting systems to turn themselves off and really, really, get into the whole smart tech space. You then got to think about, okay, what about water and waste? Because they're a big one. So sewer lines obviously cost a lot of money to get put into a property as well. But even then going slightly non-tech with that kind of stuff, there's other ways you could think about that too. So once upon a time, I used to build composting toilet systems. And so there's heaps of really interesting ways that they can be incorporated into building design using the advanced bacterial kind of stuff like that to really compost everything down in a usable way. But councils need to catch up with this kind of stuff, because it's going to be very hard for a council to, if you put in the planning permit, they're going to be like, hang on, there's no sewer, there's no power. I don't know if we can approve this. And then you're going to have to try and educate a bureaucratic system on the fact that you might not need those things. So I think we're a little way off really that becoming a plug and play solution, but I like the way that it's going.
Yeah, I find that area quite fascinating.